I found out about my own retirement party from a flyer at the coffee shop. Swear to God. Right there on the bulletin board next to lost dog ads and yoga classes, Carter and Sons. A new era begins. Grand reopening this Saturday. Food, drinks, legacy. Legacy. That word hit harder than the fact my name wasn't even on it. I stood there staring at it, coffee in hand, while two college kids next to me talked about how cool it was that the Carter boys were taking over that old furniture place downtown. One of them even said, wasn't their dad, like, super old school or something? I didn't say anything, just walked out. My name's Roy Carter. I'm 59 years old. I ran Carter Restoration and Design for 32 years. Built it from scratch. A one-man garage shop that grew into a regional name. Custom furniture, heirloom restoration, old-world craftsmanship. Real work. I handed it over to my sons, Ben and Eric, last year after a heart scare put me on the sidelines. Ben's the older one. Business savvy. Always had a plan. Eric's more reserved, sensitive kid, big heart, more like his mom. I figured I'd stay involved in the background. Teach apprentices, handle long-term clients, take on specialty projects here and there. I didn't want to let go completely, but I also didn't want to die sanding a cabinet. They smiled, nodded, called me a legend, and said the business wouldn't be the same without me. They were right. It wouldn't be. Because 2 months later, I was gone. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. They changed the office layout, fine. Switched to a digital scheduling system, fine. Moved the design meetings without me, less fine, but okay. Maybe they were just trying to modernize. Then I noticed they'd taken my name off the invoices. Carter and Sons, it said. No Roy, no dad, no founder. Just in Sons, like I died and no one told me. I confronted Ben about it one afternoon in the shop office. Branding, he said, like it was nothing. Cleaner, fresher. Clients want to know the next generation's in charge. I raised an eyebrow. And what am I? Dead weight. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You said you wanted to step back. I didn't say anything. Because I had. But not like this. Then came the envelope. Hand-delivered to me while I was sanding down a set of maple drawer fronts in the back. Just a formality, Ben said, placing it on the workbench like it was a menu. Legal stuff. Clarifies roles, liabilities, that sort of thing. Inside was a document. A consulting agreement. No title. No salary. No authority. Just a vague offer to provide historical insights on a project-by-project basis. I'm still on the board, right? I asked. Ben laughed. We're not really doing a board anymore. I tried to talk to Eric that night. He was in the paint room, airbrushing a finish on a rocking chair for a long-time client. Hey, I said, voice low. You okay with all this? He paused. The mask on his face twitched just slightly. Then he nodded. It's just business, Dad. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Just business, I repeated. Ben says we have to evolve if we want to scale. We've got investors looking at us now. Bigger clients. New directions. Is that what you want? He hesitated. Then, I don't know. That was the most honest thing anyone had said to me in weeks. 2 days later, I walked into the office to grab a client file and saw the brochure proofs on the table. Nice layout. Clean design. Pictures of the new shop floor, the apprentices, the boys shaking hands with some tech guy I didn't recognize. On the last page was a staff photo. The whole team lined up outside the shop. I wasn't in it. They'd cropped me out. That was the moment. That was the exact second I realized I wasn't fading away. I was being erased. Later that afternoon, I stumbled across it. Ben had left his laptop open in the office. I wasn't snooping. I was trying to find the Thompson project file, something I'd personally handled for over a decade. But curiosity got the better of me. A folder on his desktop caught my eye. Phase 2 transition. Inside were presentation slides, charts, brand strategy outlines. One document stopped me cold. Managing the Patriarch Exit. That was the actual title. I opened it. Bullet points stared back like a punch to the chest. Retain Roy and minimal, symbolic role for optics. Avoid confrontation. Frame transition as evolution. Target new clientele uninterested in legacy branding. Prepare PR talking points in case of pushback. There was a timeline, too. My official exit date? Last month. I sat in that chair and felt something go numb. The next week was the reopening event. The one I found out about from a coffee shop flyer. I wasn't invited. Let that sink in. My sons hosted a party to relaunch the business I started from nothing and didn't invite me. But I went anyway. I showed up 10 minutes after the speeches started. People were clapping. There were catering tents out front, a local radio station van, balloons. A banner hung over the door. Carter and Sons, a new era of craftsmanship. Inside, they had an entire wall of photos, shop history, old builds, behind-the-scenes shots. Not one photo had me in it. The slideshow running on a loop didn't show my face. Just Ben and Eric, smiling, shaking hands, posing with their sleeves rolled up like they were born for the job. A woman I didn't recognize handed me a branded coaster. "You're here for the press tour?" she asked. "I am the press," I muttered. I walked out before the speeches ended. That night, I sat in the den with a bourbon and didn't speak for hours. The house was quiet. Too quiet. My wife passed away 6 years ago. Cancer. She would have known exactly what to say, probably something like, "Let them hang themselves with their own rope." She always knew when to step back, when to wait. The next morning, I didn't go to the shop. Didn't text. Didn't call. I didn't need to. They'd already replaced me. Or so they thought. I kept to myself after that. Took up morning walks. Started showing up to the hardware store at odd hours. Cleaned out the old shed in the backyard. When Eric called to check in, I told him I was doing just fine. "Taking it easy," I said. "Learning to be retired." He sounded relieved. Too relieved. Like the problem had solved itself. But here's the thing about sawdust. It settles. It hides in cracks, clings to corners, coats everything quiet. You can sweep it up, blow it out, but it always comes back. Especially when you stop paying attention. They thought I'd disappeared. Let em. It was the last quiet day they'd ever have. By Monday morning, I was still waking up at 6 a.m. out of habit. It wasn't for work anymore, and definitely not because someone expected me to show up. There was no calendar invite, no checklist, no shop to open, just muscle memory and silence. The same mug of black coffee, the same kitchen chair with the uneven leg I never bothered to fix. It was amazing how quickly a man could vanish when no one was looking for him. I didn't show up to the shop that week. No one asked where I was. No messages. No phone calls. No, "Hey, Dad, you okay?" from Ben. Not even a weak excuse from Eric pretending to need help with a joinery issue. Nothing. And that's how I knew it wasn't an accident. They didn't forget me. They didn't miscommunicate. They wanted me gone. And they had gotten exactly what they wanted. That first week, I told myself I was done. I wouldn't chase after the business. Wouldn't beg to be included. I would let them take it all, my name, my systems, my reputation, and carry it like it was theirs. Let them sweat through client meetings they didn't understand. Let them try to charm longtime vendors who didn't respond to slogans or Instagram photos. Let them experience what happens when the scaffolding of someone else's life is handed to you and you don't know what supports it. But then I saw the brochure again. It was left at the diner, folded between 2 napkin holders. Same slick branding, same obnoxious headline. Ben Carter's vision for modern craftsmanship. I didn't get angry, not visibly, but I felt my jaw lock so tight my teeth hurt. My hand clenched the corner of that flyer until the paper creased. I stared at that smiling picture of Ben holding a chisel like a prop and felt something cold settle in my gut. That was the first crack. The first moment where my silence felt less like surrender and more like strategy. The days blurred. I kept my distance. I stayed off social media, didn't show up to any local events, didn't answer questions from the few church folks who had the nerve to ask where I'd gone. When someone asked if I was retired, I'd smile and say, "Apparently." Then I'd walk away. I stopped going downtown entirely, except for one trip to the library. The same library I used to take the boys to when they were kids. Back when story time and model trains still meant something. I claimed a back table in the archives room and started requesting records. Property agreements. Municipal board notes. Land lease renewals. Most of it was dry, slow reading, but I wasn't there for entertainment. I was there because I remembered something, an old clause from 15 years ago, back when I first leased the building for Carter Restoration. It was buried in the city records. A detail Ben would have missed because it wasn't in any of the digital documents. It had to do with naming rights and succession. There was a paragraph. Half a sentence, really, but it was enough. They wanted to inherit the business without the baggage. They might have overlooked the part where the name wasn't theirs to take. Later that week, I ran into Mr. Holloway at the post office. He was one of my oldest clients, retired architect, the kind of man who could spot a fake dovetail at 20 feet. We used to talk for hours about grain patterns and joinery angles. He smiled when he saw me, asked how retirement was treating me. The word didn't land right. I gave him a polite nod. Went by the shop last week, he said, tilting his head like he already knew the answer. Place looks different. Cold. He didn't mean temperature. I told him I was taking a break. He squinted like he didn't believe me, then leaned in. They tried to sell me a fast dry lacquer finish on a hand-carved armoire. Said that's how you used to do it. I walked out. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. His voice dropped lower. You coming back? I paused just a second too long before answering. No plans yet. Then I tipped my hat and walked away. Eric cracked first. I spotted him by accident 3 weeks after the reopening. He was at the farmer's market, alone, packing up a booth they'd rented to showcase reclaimed pieces. I stayed across the street, behind the shadow of a bus shelter. He didn't see me, but I saw everything. The way he moved slower than he used to. The way his shoulders sagged, not tired, but heavy. The way he looked at the crates like they weighed more than what should. He packed the leftover display pieces into the truck one at a time, wrapping them in the same green blankets we used to use for deliveries. When he reached for a low wooden crate, I caught a glimpse of the label. His handwriting, carefully printed. Display only, Dad's original bench piece. He brought one of my pieces, put it on display, didn't put my name on it. For a second, I almost stepped out from the shadows. Almost called his name. My hand twitched toward the truck bed. But I wasn't done watching him yet. Let him feel it. Let him feel the weight of what they'd done. That night, I sat on the back porch with a whiskey I hadn't touched in years. Not since we buried their mother. I remembered how she used to sit right there with me, rubbing her hands together when it got cold, always reminding me to wear gloves even if I was just walking out to the mailbox. She would have known what to do. She would have known which sun was salvageable and which wasn't. But I didn't have that kind of wisdom. I only had time, and they'd given me plenty of it. The next morning, I opened the old shed. Not the main workshop. Not the space where they replaced my desk with a coffee bar and shoved my files into storage boxes. No, this was the original shed. The one I started in. The one with no insulation and a leaky roof. The one where I built my first paying commission at 27 with nothing but a belt sander and borrowed hope. Dust covered everything. Tools, boxes, shelves. Spiderwebs hung like caution tape. But the bones were still solid. I spent the day cleaning. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't post a thing. By nightfall, I had cleared the bench, sharpened 3 blades, and unrolled an old blueprint onto the back wall. Not a building blueprint. A legacy map. On the far shelf, I found an old wooden crate labeled Personal Archive. Inside, a black ledger containing every original customer invoice from 1994 to 2010. 2 photo albums with billed records, including names, dates, and handwritten notes. My signature stamp, the one I used before we went digital. I pulled it out, turned it over in my hand, and for the first time in weeks, felt something that resembled peace. Then I pinned a photo to the wall above my workbench. It was one of the only ones I still had left. Me, Ben, and Eric standing outside the shop on its 5th anniversary. I was in the middle, both boys leaning against me, arms crossed, sawdust on our boots. It wasn't for nostalgia. It was a reminder. Not for them. For me. Of who built this. By the 4th week, the murmurs had started. I didn't have to dig for them. They came to me. A client at the diner asked if I was still taking private work because the boys seemed overwhelmed. One of our old vendors called just to check in, but I could hear the hesitancy in his voice, like he was waiting to be given permission to say what he really felt. They noticed things. The late deliveries. The finish inconsistencies. The lack of follow-through. The casual disregard for what we used to call client relationship craftsmanship. They noticed I wasn't there anymore. And suddenly, the work felt hollow. I said nothing. I showed up nowhere. But I watched. And waited. They thought I'd vanished. That I'd slipped away into retirement, too proud or too hurt to make a fuss. Let them think that. Because the moment people stop watching you is when you start working. And I wasn't just working. I was building. Back in the shed, I reached behind the filing cabinet and pulled out a small chalkboard I used for design notes. I picked up a piece of white chalk and began sketching. Lines. Angles. A shape that looked like a storefront, with a different name. Then I reached for the ledger, opened to page 1, and traced my finger across the top margin. Clients personally handled by Roy Carter. All 186 names were there. I smiled. This time, I wasn't building furniture. I was building something else entirely. It started with the vendor emails, or at least that's when I noticed the first ripples. Greg from Northside Lumber, who I'd worked with for nearly 20 years, forwarded me a thread, no comment, just the email. Ben had sent a price match demand, citing new operational scale and restructured leadership. Greg's reply, short and cold, simply read, "We don't renegotiate loyalty." I stared at that line longer than I needed to. It was just a vendor email, a common friction point. But buried inside, it was something bigger, a quiet refusal to forget who built what. Funny thing about a shared login no one bothered to revoke. I never had to ask questions. I just watched things shift, watched their panic build through unsent drafts and flagged client threads. I never replied to anything, never typed a word. But sometimes, I may have moved a few things around in the background. A week later, I stood across from Ben at the Springtown Artisan Showcase, sipping bad coffee and pretending to browse leather goods while his eyes locked onto mine like he'd just seen a ghost rise from his childhood nightmares. He was mid-conversation with a supplier, talking loudly about brand momentum and next phase growth. Then he turned and saw me. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just stared at him for maybe 3 full seconds, long enough for him to go pale beneath his curated tan. I took a bite of a powdered donut, slowly wiped the sugar from my lip, and walked away. He didn't chase me. He didn't say a word. But the next morning, their Instagram posts stopped tagging vendors. And 2 days after that, their top pinned comment, "Where's Roy?" was deleted and reposted by someone else with more likes than before. The harder they tried to erase the question, the louder it echoed. Ben played it cool on the outside. Charming, curated, condescending as ever. But inside, the cracks were spreading fast. I knew the moment I saw that sponsored ad campaign disappear mid-run. One of their biggest initiatives, targeted custom ads with local partnerships, just vanished. No explanation. No announcement. No apology. I didn't need confirmation. I knew who'd handled the billing for that vendor during my tenure. And I knew what happened when you miss a renewal payment by 48 hours because you assumed everything auto-processed. Meanwhile, the comment threads turned. Slowly at first. Someone posted, "Used to love their work. Doesn't feel the same without the old guy." Another added, "They say he retired, but I heard he still lives in town." Then came the side-by-side photo comparison. Ben posing with a warped table leg next to an old snapshot of me restoring a Civil War writing desk by hand. The caption just said, "Then versus now." For a moment, I almost replied to that post. Almost typed, "He never left." But I didn't, because the silence was starting to speak louder than I ever could. Eric broke first, though it wasn't public. It was late on a Wednesday, sky half raining, the wind slicing just enough to keep casual shoppers inside. I had no reason to be downtown, but my boots ended up on the sidewalk across from the shop anyway. Just like the old days, before things broke. Before they decided I was in the way. The lights were still on inside. I recognized the soft glow of the old hanging Edison bulbs, the ones I installed myself back when I still believed in ambience. Through the front window, I spotted him, Eric, alone, standing by a table halfway through being stained. His hands were coated in product, shirt sleeve rolled to the elbow, but he wasn't working. He just stood there, motionless, looking down at the piece like it was asking a question he didn't know how to answer. And that's when he said my name. He didn't know I could hear him, didn't even know I was there. But clear as day, he whispered it under his breath, "Dad." Like it escaped him, like he'd been holding it back for weeks and finally slipped. I watched him lower his head. One hand clenched the side of the table. The other hovered midair like he wanted to reach for something. Me, maybe, or the version of me he remembered. But nothing moved. He didn't call again. Just went back to sanding like he was trying to erase the moment. Meanwhile, Ben was unraveling the way men like him always do. Not with honesty, not with confession, but with performance. 2 days later, a damage control video popped up on their social feed. Him sitting in front of the workbench, sleeves rolled again, flannel too clean to be authentic. "Hey everyone," he said, eyes heavy with the fake sincerity you learn from business books. "We just wanted to clarify some confusion that's been circulating. My father, Roy Carter, is enjoying his well-earned retirement after decades of building this company. He went on about legacy, about vision, about progress without forgetting roots. But he never looked into the camera for more than 3 seconds at a time. Because that's what guilt does to your pupils. It makes them fidget. I played the video twice. Then I closed my laptop, stood up, and went back to the shed. I didn't say a word. But in the corner of my bench sat the signature stamp they never thought I'd see again. I ran my finger across the engraved wood, slow and deliberate, until I could feel the curve of every letter in my name. There was one client who really started the slide. Linda Martinez, high-end residential, hyper-discerning, old money. I'd built her a walnut console table 12 years ago that she still called the only thing in the house that doesn't collect dust. I hadn't spoken to her in years. But one morning I got a call from an unknown number. I almost let it ring out, but something told me to answer. "Roy," she asked, her voice light but clipped, like someone holding back disappointment. "Did you approve the design for the entryway set?" I didn't say anything at first. Then I asked, "What set?" She paused. "From Carter & Sons. Ben said you were overseeing legacy clients." I didn't laugh. I just let that silence hang in the air. "I didn't approve anything," I finally said. The line went quiet. Then she muttered, "That little bastard." By week's end, Carter & Sons lost 2 retainer accounts and 3 prospective commissions, none of which I had to call about. All it took was the right people asking the right questions. People who knew me. People who remembered how I handled things. Quietly. Personally. Honestly. The truth doesn't need a megaphone. Just a crack. The pressure takes care of the rest. Eric must have felt it most. I saw him again late one evening, sitting alone in the back lot, legs dangling off the dock behind the shop. He had a notebook in his hand and was flipping pages without looking. The wind kept tugging at his sleeves. I stayed in my truck across the street, headlights off, watching through the windshield. At one point, he looked up like he sensed something. Looked straight ahead. Not at me. He couldn't see me, but in my direction. And for a second, his whole body slumped forward like a man surrendering to the weight of his own breath. Maybe he wanted forgiveness. But I wasn't offering any. Not yet. The final straw wasn't even that dramatic. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon, overcast, traffic light. I walked past the shop like I always did, slow, invisible, unnoticed. And that's when I saw it. The display shelf in the front window, the one labeled Original Bench Piece by Roy Carter, display only, was gone. Not rearranged. Not moved. Gone. No replacement. Just a cold, blank space. Like they couldn't bear to look at me anymore. That night, back in the shed, I ran my hand across the blueprint I'd been sketching for weeks now. It wasn't a piece of furniture. Not a table. Not a cabinet. It was a floor plan. A storefront. Mine. Not Carter & Sons. Just Carter. I pinned a fresh photo beside it. An old one of me standing outside the first location, 25 years younger, one arm around Eric, the other gripping a mallet like it was a symbol. They thought they could erase me. But legacy doesn't die quietly. Sometimes it gets loud. It started small, most revenge does. A flagged permit. A bounce-back lease. A slow drip of unanswered emails from suppliers who used to return calls same day when my name was on the signature. Ben didn't know it yet, but the moment he reclassified the company's business status to contemporary design retail for a cleaner tax ID, he lit the match himself. Because buried in the original zoning contract I fought to have written in 2004, after blocking 3 big-box developers, was a covenant that tied operation rights to the founders' retained interest. And the city still had my name on file. Not theirs. The first time they noticed, it was probably just a denial email. But by the end of that week, they couldn't get approval for a sandwich board on the sidewalk, let alone a second location. I didn't smile when I saw the public permit page. But I didn't look away either. Eric called late. Voice tight. Hope cracked beneath politeness. "Dad, did you know there's a clause that restricts changes to the company footprint unless you're still listed as an owner?" I let the question hang a second longer than comfort allowed. "I did," I finally said. His breath caught. "They're freezing us out. Pulling permits. Investors are walking. Even Linda, remember her, the walnut table? She canceled her commission." "I remember." He hesitated. "You knew this would happen." I didn't answer. Because he wasn't wrong. The audit came next. Not my doing, at least not directly. But the thing about legacy clients is, when they smell something rotten, they don't call the Better Business Bureau first. They call each other. And Linda Martinez still sits on the Regional Heritage Committee. By the time local press caught on, the Carter & Sons brand wasn't just struggling, it was tainted. Half-truths, legal uncertainty, online comments about poor quality, and fake retirement narratives. Even vendors started saying things like, "It's not the same without Roy." They didn't tag me. They didn't have to. That silence was a bigger signature than I ever carved into wood. The final week was a slow-motion unraveling. Missed orders, canceled subscriptions, layout revisions returned and signed. The city's website listed the shop as under review for historical operating noncompliance. It was a bureaucratic phrase, but it read like a death sentence. I walked by one morning just as they were pulling the big glass signage down to repaint it. The logo peeled like a sticker someone tried too hard to smooth over. I didn't stop walking, but I heard the guy on the ladder mutter, "We're their rebranding now." That's when I let myself smile. Just once. The confrontation came quietly. Ben was standing behind the front desk when I walked in, the smell of stale varnish and commercial air freshener clashing in a way that made my chest ache. The floors I hand-finished were now covered in soft vinyl for better acoustics. The front room had been repainted a sterile gray. They'd called it modernizing. I called it forgetting. He looked up, eyes sunken from nights of pretending everything was still under control. "You proud of yourself?" he asked. I didn't speak. "You burned it all down." I stepped forward, stopped just shy of the counter. "I didn't light anything," I said quietly. "I just stopped holding the roof up." Ben scoffed, but it wasn't strong. More like a twitch in the throat. "You knew what you were doing. All the paperwork, the filings, the city stuff. We didn't even see it coming." "You weren't supposed to," I said. "That's the point of foundations. You only notice them when they crack." His jaw tightened. Then his voice dropped. "You don't get it. It was supposed to be mine. For once, it was supposed to be mine." That stopped me. I looked at him, not like a son, not like a partner, just like a man who'd never stopped trying to prove something. "You wanted the name," I said, "but you never wanted the weight that came with it." He didn't answer. And for 1 second, just one, I stood there in the shop I built, and I wanted to scream. To tear every photo off the wall, to pound my fists against the display case until the wood split. But I didn't, because this wasn't rage. This was grief, aged and cured like timber. I turned to leave. "You win," he muttered behind me, bitter, tired. I stopped. "No," I said, looking over my shoulder. "I built. You forgot. That's the difference." Eric came by the next day. I found him sitting behind the shed with a cup of coffee he didn't touch. His eyes were red, but his shoulders weren't collapsed. They were squared, like a man who'd started accepting what needed to change. "I don't expect to come back," he said quietly. "I just didn't want to disappear without telling you I was sorry." I sat beside him, silent for a long time. "You can't undo it," I said eventually. "But you can still build something better." He nodded, slowly, like he wasn't sure if that was permission or challenge. "Not with Ben," he said. I didn't answer. He already knew. That night, after he left, I walked into the shed, clicked off the fan, and turned the light off for the first time in months. I stood there in the quiet, surrounded by the tools no one had ever taken from me, the plans no one thought to ask about, and the smell of sawdust that still reminded me what permanence really meant. Then I turned toward the back wall, where a fresh piece of ash sat upright against the studs. I ran my hand across its grain. Tomorrow, I'd carve something new. Not a business, not a comeback, just my name. And for the first time in months, I finally breathed easy.